But when they came nearer, the captain and Friday, starting up on their feet, let fly at them. The boatswain was killed upon the spot. The next man was shot in the body and fell just by him, though he did not die till an hour or two after. And the third ran for it. At the noise of the fire, I immediately advanced with my whole army, which was now 8 men, myself, Generalissimo, Friday, my lieutenant general, the captain and his 2 men, and the 3 prisoners of war whom we had trusted with arms. We came upon them indeed in the dark, so they could not see our number, and I made the man they had left in the boat, who was now one of us, to call them by name to try if I could bring them to parley, and so perhaps might reduce them to terms, which fell out just as we desired. For indeed it was easy to think, as their condition then was, they would be very willing to capitulate. So he calls out as loud as he could to one of them, "Tom Smith! Tom Smith!" Tom Smith answered immediately, "Is that Robinson?" For it seems he knew the voice. The other answered, "Aye, aye, for God's sake, Tom Smith, throw down your arms and yield, or you're all dead men this moment." "Who must we yield to? Where are they?" says Smith again. "Here they are," says he. "Here's our captain and 50 men with him. Have been hunting you these 2 hours. The boatswain is killed. Will Fry is wounded, and I'm a prisoner, and if you do not yield, you are all lost." "Will they give us quarter then?" says Tom Smith, "and we will yield." "I'll go and ask, if you promise to yield," said Robinson. So he asks the captain, and the captain himself then calls out, "You, Smith, you know my voice. If you lay down your arms immediately and submit, you shall have your lives all but Will Atkins." Upon this, Will Atkins cried out, "For God's sake, Captain, give me quarter. What have I done? They have all been as bad as I." Which, by the way, was not true, for it seems this Will Atkins was the first man that laid hold of the captain when they first mutinied, and usaged him barbarously in tying his hands and giving him injurious language. However, the captain told him he must lay down his arms at discretion and trust to the governor's mercy, by which he meant me, for they all called me the governor. In a word, they all laid down their arms and begged their lives, and I sent the man that had parleyed with them and 2 more who bound them all, and then my great army of 50 men, which, with those 3, were all in all but 8, came up and seized upon them and upon their boat, only that I kept myself and 1 more out of sight for reasons of state. Our next work was to repair the boat and think of seizing the ship, and as for the captain, now he had leisure to parley with them. He expostulated with them upon the villainy of their practices with him, and upon the further wickedness of their design, and how certainly it must bring them to misery and distress in the end, and perhaps to the gallows. They all appeared very penitent, and begged hard for their lives. As for that, he told them they were not his prisoners, but the commanders of the island, that they thought they had set him on shore in a barren, uninhabited island, but it had pleased God so to direct them that it was inhabited, and that the governor was an Englishman, that he might hang them all there, if he pleased. But as he had given them all quarter, he supposed he would send them to England to be dealt with there as justice required, except Atkins, whom he was commanded by the governor to advise to prepare for death, for that he would be hanged in the morning. Though this was all but a fiction of his own, yet it had its desired effect. Atkins fell upon his knees to beg the captain to intercede with the governor for his life, and all the rest begged of him, for God's sake, that they might not be sent to England. It now occurred to me that the time of our deliverance was come, and that it would be a most easy thing to bring these fellows in to be hearty in getting possession of the ship. So I retired in the dark from them, that they might not see what kind of governor they had, and called the captain to me. When I called at a good distance, one of the men was ordered to speak again, and say to the captain, "Captain, the commander's call for you." And presently the captain replied, "Tell his excellency I am just coming." This more perfectly amazed them, and they all believed that the commander was just by, with his 50 men. Upon the captain coming to me, I told him my project for seizing the ship, which he liked wonderfully well, and resolved to put it in execution the next morning. But in order to execute it with more art and to be secure of success, I told him we must divide the prisoners, and that he should go and take Atkins and 2 more of the worst of them and send them pinioned to the cave where the others lay. This was committed to Friday and the 2 men who came on shore with the captain. They conveyed them to the cave as to a prison, and it was indeed a dismal place, especially to men in their condition. The others I ordered to my bower, as I called it, of which I had given a full description, and as it was fenced in and they pinioned, the place was secure enough, considering they were upon their behavior. To these in the morning I sent the captain, who was to enter into a parley with them, in a word, to try them, and tell me whether he thought they might be trusted or not to go on board and surprise the ship. He talked to them of the injury done him, of the condition they were brought to, and that though the governor had given them quarter for their lives as to the present action, yet that if they were sent to England they would all be hanged in chains. But if they would join in so just an attempt as to recover the ship, he would have the governor's engagement for their pardon. Anyone may guess how readily such a proposal would be accepted by men in their condition. They fell down on their knees to the captain and promised, with the deepest imprecations, that they would be faithful to him to the last drop, and that they should owe their lives to him and would go with him all over the world, that they would own him as a father to them as long as they lived. "Well," says the captain, "I must go and tell the governor what you say, and see what I can do to bring him to consent to it." So he brought me an account of the temper he found them in, and that he verily believed they would be faithful. However, that he might be very secure, I told him he should go back again and choose out those 5, and tell them that they might see he did not want men, that he would take out those 5 to be his assistants, and that the governor would keep the other 2, and the 3 that were sent prisoners to the castle, my cave, as hostages for the fidelity of those 5, and that if they proved unfaithful in the execution, the 5 hostages should be hanged in chains alive on the shore. This looked severe, and convinced them that the governor was in earnest. However, they had no way left them but to accept it, and it was now the business of the prisoners, as much as of the captain, to persuade the other 5 to do their duty. Our strength was now thus ordered for the expedition. First, the captain, his mate, and passenger. Second, the 2 prisoners of the first gang, to whom, having their character from the captain, I had given their liberty, and trusted them with arms. Third, the other 2 that I had kept till now in my bower, pinioned, but on the captain's motion had now released. Fourth, these 5 released at last, so that there were 12 in all, besides 5 we kept prisoners in the cave for hostages. I asked the captain if he was willing to venture with these hands on board the ship, but as for me and my man Friday, I did not think it was proper for us to stir, having 7 men left behind, and it was employment enough for us to keep them asunder and supply them with victuals. As to the 5 in the cave, I resolved to keep them fast, but Friday went in twice a day to them to supply them with necessaries, and I made the other 2 carry provisions to a certain distance where Friday was to take them. When I showed myself to the 2 hostages, it was with the captain, who told them I was the person the governor had ordered to look after them, and it was the governor's pleasure they should not stir anywhere but my direction, that if they did, they would be fetched into the castle and be laid in irons, so that, as we never suffered them to see me as governor, I now appeared as another person, and spoke of the governor, the garrison, the castle, and the like upon all occasions. The captain now had no difficulty before him, but to furnish his 2 boats, stop the breach of one, and man them. He made his passenger captain of one, with 4 of the men, and himself, his mate, and 5 more went in the other. And they contrived their business very well, for they came up to the ship about midnight. As soon as they came within call of the ship, he made Robinson hail them, and tell them they had brought off the men in the boat, but that it was a long time before they had found them, and the like, holding them in a chat till they came to the ship's side, when the captain and the mate entering first with their arms, immediately knocked down the second mate and carpenter with the butt end of their muskets, being very faithfully seconded by their men. They secured all the rest that were upon the main and quarter decks, and began to fasten the hatches, to keep them down that were below, when the other boat and their men, entering at the forechains, secured the forecastle of the ship, and the scuttle which went down into the cook-room, making 3 men they found there prisoners. When this was done, and all safe upon the deck, the captain ordered the mate with 3 men to break into the roundhouse, where the new rebel captain lay, who, having taken the alarm, had got up, and with 2 men and a boy had got firearms in their hands. And when the mate with the crow split open the door, the new captain and his men fired boldly among them, and wounded the mate with a musket ball which broke his arm, and wounded 2 more of the men, but killed nobody. The mate, calling for help, rushed, however, into the roundhouse, wounded as he was, and with his pistol shot the new captain through the head, the bullet entering at his mouth and came out again behind one of his ears, so that he never spoke a word more. Upon which the rest yielded, and the ship was taken effectually without any more lives lost. As soon as the ship was thus secured, the captain ordered 7 guns to be fired, which was the signal agreed upon with me to give me notice of his success, which you may be sure I was very glad to hear, having sat watching upon the shore for it till near 2 o'clock in the morning. Having thus heard the signal plainly, I laid me down, and it having been a day of great fatigue to me, I slept very sound, till I was surprised with the noise of a gun, and presently starting up, I heard a man call me by my name of Governor, Governor, and presently I knew the captain's voice. When climbing up to the top of the hill, there he stood, and pointing to the ship, he embraced me in his arms. "My dear friend and deliverer," says he, "there's your ship, for she is all yours, and so are we, and all that belong to her." I cast my eyes to the ship, and there she rode, within little more than half a mile of the shore, for they had weighed her anchor as soon as they were masters of her, and the weather being fair, had brought her to an anchor just against the mouth of the little creek, and the tide being up, the captain had brought the pinnacle in near the place where I had first landed my rafts, and so landed just at my door. I was at first ready to sink down with the surprise, for I saw my deliverance, indeed, visibly put into my hands, all things easy, and a large ship just ready to carry me away whither I pleased to go. At first, for some time, I was not able to answer him one word, but as he had taken me in his arms, I held fast by him, or I could have fallen to the ground. He perceived the surprise, and immediately pulled a bottle out of his pocket and gave me a dram of cordial, which he had brought on purpose for me. After I had drunk it, I sat down upon the ground, and though it brought me to myself, yet it was a good while before I could speak a word to him. All this time, the poor man was in as great an ecstasy as I, only not under any surprise as I was, and he said 1,000 kind and tender things to me to compose and bring me to myself. But such was the flood of joy in my breast that it put all my spirits into confusion. At last it broke out into tears, and in a little while after I recovered my speech, I then took my turn and embraced him as my deliverer, and we rejoiced together. I told him I looked upon him as a man sent by heaven to deliver me, and that the whole transaction seemed to be a chain of wonders, that such things as these were the testimonies we had of a secret hand of providence governing the world, and an evidence that the eye of an infinite power could search into the remotest corner of the world and send help to the miserables whenever he pleased. I forgot not to lift up my heart in thankfulness to heaven, and what heart could forbear to bless him, who had not only in a miraculous manner provided for me in such a wilderness and in such a desolate condition, but from whom every deliverance must always be acknowledged to proceed. When we had talked a while, the captain told me he had brought me some little refreshments, such as the ship afforded, and such as the wretches that had been so long his masters had not plundered him of. Upon this, he called aloud to the boat, and bade his men bring the things ashore that were for the governor. And, indeed, it was a present as if I had been one that was not to be carried away with them, but as if I had been to dwell upon the island still. First, he had brought me a case of bottles full of excellent cordial waters, 6 large bottles of Madeira wine, the bottles held 2 quarts each, 2 pounds of excellent good tobacco, 12 good pieces of the ship's beef, and 6 pieces of pork.